The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms. Merry meet! Welcome to another episode of the Oracle of Luna podcast. I'm Bridget Engels, your host, and today I am delighted to chat with Molly Remer. Molly is a priestess, author, poet, and creatrix. Molly and her husband Mark co-create story goddesses at Brigid's Grove. She is the author of several books, including Walking with Persephone, Whole and Holy, Womanrunes, Goddess Devotional, 365 Days of Goddess, and her latest book, The Great Between, an Inanna Devotional Companion. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. So how's your day going?
Well, it's been very full with lots of things taking place. And I had some doctor's appointment type of phone calls and an older son to take to a driving test and all kinds of things. But one of the things I was actually thinking about is I wrote 2 poems in the parking lot at the Highway Patrol because I firmly believe that there's magic everywhere, even in the parking lot of the Highway Patrol. And I thought when I was writing them, like, if I can write poems here, then, pretty much I can find poems anywhere.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, I do my best work in my car waiting for things. So
yeah, sometimes I have a little bag of stuff with me. I had like my planner, I had my prayer book, I had a little journal, and he kind of laughed at me like, why are you bringing all these things with you, Mom? And I'm like, because you never know when inspiration will strike. You'll never know when there's going to be a little pocket of magic that you can explore right there. So I had my colored pens just in case,
That's right. That's awesome. Okay. So I have a lot to unpack here, and I'm just going to launch right in. So are you ready to go?
Sounds good.
All right, let's get rolling. So my first question for you is, how did your spiritual path with the goddess begin? Can you tell us a little bit about maybe your early beginnings and inklings as you discovered magic and the goddess?
Absolutely. Yes. And so I usually say that I feel like she danced around the edges of my consciousness for quite some time, even dating back into childhood. I remember lying on my back on the earth and feeling like I could feel the whole world spin underneath me. And looking back at those kind of moments, I think like the goddess was dancing around the edges. And I was raised in kind of a non-traditional home. We were not particularly religious, but we were not particularly pagan per se, but we were definitely not religious in like a Abrahamic or standard conventional religion type of perspective. So I had some exposure to mother blessing ceremonies and full moon circles and things like that with my mom and her friends. And so that was a little seed that was planted there too. But truly my walk with the goddess began in earnest when I had just finished graduate school. So I was in my very early 20s, and I had a friend who took a women's studies class, and she said, you would love these books that we're reading in the women's studies class. And so she lent me When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone and The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler.
Yes, and classics.
That's when my walk with the goddess like really began. So I had the seeds were planted in childhood. The seeds were planted in an early kind of sensation of being encompassed or held or, participating in the sacred rhythms of life. But then as far as like an actual path, I would say that those books, that experience of her lending me those books really was the beginning of what has become a lifelong a lifelong endeavor and a lifelong path.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did you grow up? I'm just curious what part of the country and yeah.
Central Missouri,
Mm.
rural Central Missouri.
Yeah, I'm always interested in where people kind of grow up, their early beginnings, because it shapes
Mhm,
us. And just knowing that you're a very grounded person and growing up a rural area is just really kind of
mhm.
kind of says a lot about what you're doing now, right?
It does. And it is interesting because I'm very much enmeshed in the Bible Belt. I'm right in the middle of the Midwest
Yeah.
and right in the middle of the Bible Belt. But because of the time period in which I grew up and the friends in which my parents had and with which they surrounded us, there was very much kind of a counterculture or like, revolutionary type of subculture there. Even right here in rural Missouri, there still are people who are kind of alternatively inclined or who are, practicing Reiki and like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so even I think that something that it's helpful to me to remember and to share that with other people, particularly people who are interested in priestessing or creating rituals. And they'll say, but where I live, there is no one, they said there's no one around. And I think, well, I found these people and I found people in central Missouri, since I was a child. And so I'm sure there's people everywhere. Like I'm pretty sure there's people everywhere and they can surprise you. People can really surprise you with what they're interested in. I was very shaped by that Bible Belt kind of climate and I was homeschooled as a child. And so a lot of my peers were fundamentalist Christians, like extremely, like very fundamentalist Christians where,
Mm,
the
yeah.
girls couldn't wear pants. The girls had to wear head coverings, the men were the head of the household. And so I was very much like a kind of not, I wasn't really an outsider because I had lots of friends in that community, but I was definitely different. And I was willing to go ahead and speak up for like other things. So I remember when I was a teenager, people calling me like, are you one of those kind of feminists or something? And they said it like a bad word, they said it like it was a bad word or something. And obviously the impression was supposed to be that I was supposed to be shamed or blamed. I was supposed to hear that and think, oh no, I'm not one of those bad feminists. And I said, yes, actually I am. I am a feminist. And I was about 13, and that was a really pivotal moment for me of naming and claiming it, and of standing up and not kind of bowing to the peer pressure of fitting into that mold. And I had all kinds of experiences that did shape my confidence in calling things magic or naming the goddess, because I did have so many friends who were in that fundamentalist Christian kind of background. But it also gave me an early introduction to standing up for myself and not going with like the accepted convention, but saying,
Mm.
yes, actually I am these things.
Yeah, right. And just owning it and
Mm-hmm.
like you
Mm-hmm.
said, stand up for your convictions and beliefs.
When you claim the title, or when you say yes, yes, that is me, it no longer becomes a weapon to attack you with. When you say, if somebody's calling you a witch or somebody's saying, oh, you're a feminist, like it's a bad thing, and you say, yes, actually I am, suddenly the word loses its power to hurt you and instead becomes a source of power.
Absolutely. When did you decide to become a priestess? And can you talk a little bit about priestessing and what does that mean to be a priestess in 2024? And I always like to address like how is being a priestess relevant right here, right now? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. And so my priestess path started very like discreetly with a really specific experience, and it was directly connected to the resources from the Women in Religion program. So the Unitarian Universalists have a separate like kind of subdivision called
Mm.
Women in Religion, and they
Uh-huh.
offer a training program called Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And it's a training program in feminist theology with an A, feminist spirituality. And they offered a training, and I was already interested in women's circles and things like that. But what I had always experienced was in the context of mother blessings. So
Mm.
my mom's friends, and then later me and my friends would have mother blessing ceremonies for each other. But that's kind of all we did. Like if somebody was pregnant, you had a mother blessing. And I did. I had a maiden ritual. We had maiden rituals for like our 12-year-olds type of thing too. But that was pretty much what we experienced.
Yeah.
And I went to this Cakes for the Queen of Heaven training at Elliott Chapel in St. Louis, which is a UU church there. And I had seen a little sign for it. I don't even remember how I got a postcard. I guess I got a postcard about it. I went to this training, and that was in 2000. I don't remember, 2008 or something like that. I went to this training and I sat there in these circles with these UU women, and we had goddess robes we were draped in, and we made bread in the shape of goddesses, and we sang songs and we drummed, and there were candles. And I looked around at these other people, and I thought, oh, this is what else there is for me. This is what else there is for me. We can create ceremonies like this, and no one has to be pregnant. Because before, I had the sensation like, oh, you get to have a ceremony or a ritual if you're pregnant. And then that's the only time you get to have like the ceremony. And I had this, it was a really a kind of this epiphany moment of looking around and thinking, we can have ceremonies all the time. We can have rituals all the time. Like, we can make magic all the time. Like, nobody has to be pregnant in order to have this kind of celebration, in order to have this kind of ritual experience. It was really, really powerful. And so that was and I came back home to my community immediately. I talked to my friends. I was like, hey, let's start doing women's retreats. And so we started having quarterly women's retreats then, which I guess was 2008, actually. So we started to have quarterly women's retreats, and I basically never stopped holding circles since then. It took me a little bit longer. I became ordained as a priestess in 2012. So it took me longer to call myself a priestess, even though I'd been leading circles for 4 years before I actually became ordained and called it.
Yeah. Is this sort of, would you say it's pagan or Wiccan, or just sort of more goddess?
I would not. I would say it's goddess oriented and this feminist theology, or earth centered, earth based feminist practice. And I see them as separate but entwined under a pagan umbrella. But I consider a goddess oriented path to actually be a separate path. I mean, separate makes me sound too like divisive. Not separate, but it's its own path. We have our own lineage. We have our own foremothers and way showers. We have our own teachers, and it's actually different from modern paganism. Like the line the line you follow into goddess spirituality is often different than a pagan path, even though you could say we're all under that same kind of pagan umbrella. And I really do think, you asked about what does it mean to be a priestess in 2024. I really think in many ways it is about responding to the needs of the community and to that deep spiritual hunger that so many people feel for something more, just like I sat in that circle and I thought, like, this is what there is for me. This is the something more that I've been looking for. Many people feel that sense of the something more. And I really feel like that's part of what priestessing in 2024, or priestessing in the contemporary age, is about, is responding to that hunger that people feel for something more and creating nourishing containers in which they can experience that in sacred circle.
It's about stepping into the web of life, I feel like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we are so, just like you said, we are very disconnected. We're all on our phones. We're, fragmented society. So I think having a circle or coven or circle is so, so important for connecting us as women and people.
Yes, and I found locally that I held a red tent for a lot of years, because I found that some people were a little bit you can create a larger umbrella, so to speak, or like a larger container that can hold people from a variety of spiritual backgrounds and beliefs, and even people with no particular faith background, who are even maybe leaning kind of atheist or leaning agnostic, or who are recovering from Christianity, or who are maybe kind of, or who may be kind of liberally Christian still, or people who are kind of broadly religious or spiritual but not religious, or people who are Buddhist, and they can all come together in a sacred circle that honors the sacred feminine, that honors the goddess. They can all kind of come together in that experience of celebrating and honoring like our own rites of passage, our own transitional moments, our own lives as they are right now. And so people have a hunger for that, and I've found that you don't have to all share the same label, or you don't have to all share the same definition in order to still share really fulfilling sacred space together.
Yes, it's like you said, you're creating sacred space. That's the objective, right?
Absolutely.
So how did you become a poet and author? And when did you know that you were going to be a word person?
A word person. Well, that is a very interesting question, because I really feel like it was the land, the earth, my own landscape that taught me poems, because I still feel that way, is that I don't necessarily write poetry so much as go outside and pick up the poems that are drifting by. Like I go outside and catch them as they
Yeah.
fly past me, or I step into them as they unfold. So that's what I learned in this process. I called it my woods priestess practice, where I decided to go down to a single spot in the woods every single day for a year and see what I could learn from that spot.
Yeah.
And what I found is I would go down to the woods, I would step out onto the rocks, and I would stand there or sit there and I would open my mouth, and a lot of times poetry would come out without me meaning to. And so at the time, I would never have called myself a poet. I said, I'm not really a poet, but sometimes when I sit down and open my mouth, poetry comes out. And so as time has gone on, and I'm now in my 13th book, and 11 of those are books of poems, I guess I am a poet. But it
Yeah.
took me a long time to know that I was a poet. What instead I would say is that I'd open my mouth and sometimes poetry comes out. And I define that experience as theopoetics, which is a phrase that I actually coined based on another term that's theopoetics, which is basically the direct experience of the divine through language, through poetry,
Mm.
where you experience, sense, or inhabit, so to speak, the goddess or the divine or the sacred through language, through words. And that's how, like, the poetry that comes out is kind of this dynamic dance or this
Yeah.
dynamic interplay with the divine in the world, with the sacred in the world. So it took me a long time, but I think that poems kind of found me in the woods. Poems found me in the woods. And then I started to share those and gradually name and claim that label too. I started writing publicly in 2000. I've been a writer for almost my entire life. I
Oh, have
started
you?
writing publicly as a blogger my first piece of published work was when I was about 12. I did there was a homeschoolers literary magazine, and I published a poem in that and a
Wow.
book review. And that was my first piece of published writing, was actually a poem about sitting in the woods and looking at the dogwood trees, which I have to say, now I'm 45 and I still write poems about sitting in the woods and looking at the dogwood trees. So some things never change. But so I was 12 and I had two pieces published, and I continued to write. I wrote lots of great papers in college and that kind of stuff, but I started to write publicly in 2007 when I started a blog. And so I've written for years and years and years, but the poetry didn't really seize hold of me until about 2012, and then has continued to expand from there. It really is, writing and words are really how Wayne Dyer says, don't die with your music still in you. And I found that when I found an outlet for my words in writing, that was how I let my music play. My metaphorical music
Hmm.
is the writing process.
I feel like attuning with nature is so powerful, and
Mm-hmm.
being a channel for
Mm-hmm.
what comes out of that is purity and its power. So that's one of the things that strikes me with your writing is the
Mm-hmm.
purity, and it's sacred in the everyday, but it's being
Yeah.
present. Being very present and attuned and connected with nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you find the poem, and I've written that for years about living my poems. One of my earlier books of poetry was called "She Lives Her Poems," because I thought, like, that's I live these poems. Like
Yeah.
the poem is my life, and my life is the poem, and everything's a poem if you know where to look. Like everything's a poem, and sometimes it's just the poem is there, and you step outside and you, like I said, you grab it as it's walking by, or you sit with it, or you soak in it, or you open your hands to it. Like the poem is there, and you open your eyes and see it as it unfolds. And I know sometimes people might think that of that as kind of almost like too simplistic or something, but I really find the circles that I lead online, when I give people a poetry prompt or ask them to step into their own poetic capacity, I really marvel at how many poems there are out there in the world, just waiting for you to see them, just waiting for you to open your eyes and see, like, how that poem is alive in your life at this
Yeah.
moment.
And it takes a certain amount of sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
really
Yes.
open up about, oh, what am I seeing, what am I feeling right
Yes.
now?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes.
So you are the author of several books, 13, I think you mentioned, and
Yes.
they seem to have a common thread of being intentional and creative and everyday enchantment and spiritual living and goddess devotion. So what inspires you to write your books? I understand, you're basically, you love being out in the woods and attuning with
Mm-hmm.
nature and writing poems, but is there anything else that kind of burns in your soul and makes you really inspired to write?
Well, it really is. I mean, as you already mentioned, it really is the land, the rooting down into my own daily practice of being here,
Yeah.
essentially being here. I always say like mine is a living practice. Like it's a living practice that's rooted in this moment, and it's a living practice of arising and unfolding. So really that's where my writing comes from is what's real right now. What's real right now? What is arising and unfolding right now? So the cycles and the rhythms of life, like presencing myself in my own life, like opening my eyes and seeing where I am and what is happening. So, what is here, what is now, truly is my deepest inspiration. And yeah, and I really do think that there's kind of a language of the goddess or a language of the sacred, as I touched on with the theopoetics concept. There's a
Mhm.
language of the goddess that's alive all around us and is alive in our own landscapes that we can tap into, that we can tune into, and that we can be nourished and sustained by. And so, truly, yeah, truly, that's what inspires me is that participation in life's own unfolding magic as it is, where it is. There's so much to discover every single day that I am boggled by and humbled by how much magic there is to see.
Yeah, and especially where you are out in the woods. It
Hmm.
sounds
Yes, that's true.
beautiful.
Hmm.
But for everybody, some of us live in
Hmm.
urban areas and
Yes. Hmm.
suburban areas. Some people live in, just out on a boat. But it's truly wherever you are at the moment
Hmm.
is where
Yes.
you can have everyday enchantment and make your magic.
Yes. Absolutely. And that's one of the things I say too, is that because I do recognize that there's a lot of privilege with living in a place where I can step outside and, I can look around and only see trees. And there's always something that's new in bloom, and I can find a feather, and I can look up and see the birds. But we all have sky and we all have skin. Like no matter where we live, we all have sky and we all have skin. And that means there's magic there. Like that means there's magic there. And so it's definitely easier when we can step outside and see the beautiful swaying oak trees and things like that. Though there are a
Yeah.
lot of mosquitoes and ticks here too, so there's some drawbacks. But even so, like I referenced the highway patrol and writing poems in the parking lot. And last time I was at the highway patrol, I saw there was morning glories by the sidewalk in bloom.
Aw.
And then this time I was walking on the sidewalk to keep myself busy while my son was taking his driver's test, and I found a blue jay feather in the gutter. And
Hmm.
so even though I was there in a concrete, in a concrete world, walking on a road, there was still a blue jay feather on the sidewalk that I found and picked up. And there was crows on the roof of the church across the road. And there's often bits of magic to be found, regardless of what this environmental setting is like. And I
Yeah.
challenge myself to see it. I've joked before that you can have a spiritual experience with a rose in the McDonald's drive-through parking, the McDonald's drive-through. Like there's a lot of times there's roses growing there. There's beautiful flowering trees sometimes at Walmart in the median, and I'm always alert for those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Vultures over the highway, crows in the road, hawks on the electric poles. There's all kinds of stuff to be discovered.
Flower flowers in the Starbucks drive-through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Drive-thrus have little bits of magic in them. They really
Yeah.
do.
Tell us a little bit about Bridget's Grove and the story goddesses that you and your husband create. What do these mini sculptures, devotional art pieces express?
Yes, absolutely. So I really feel so I started creating goddess sculptures quite a few years ago when I was pregnant for the first time, because I was looking at birth art and like creating like these pregnant sculptures. And then my work evolved into, again, much like the women's circle work, evolving from having to be pregnant in order to have ceremony. My artwork also evolved from representing like motherhood, birth, pregnancy, parenting kind of journey into a type of wholeness, like, being whole unto ourselves without being defined in relationship to to children, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really feel like, and I make small pocket-sized little handheld goddess sculptures, and I really feel like their true gift is that they make a tangible connection with divinity. They are a tangible connection with the sacred that you can hold in your hand. And so they're a companion, and they give you something literally to hold on to, as well as metaphorically. Like I think our spiritual traditions give us something to hold on to metaphorically, but these little goddess figures are a tangible expression that you can
Mhm.
actually hold on to physically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I laugh sometimes that I think about my own life here in the woods as, am I walking in the palm of her hand, or is she in the palm of my hand, And the
Yeah,
answer is both. The answer is both. Like, she's
right.
in the palm of our hands and we're walking in the palm of her hand. So the goddesses really are an expression of that understanding that, like, we exist in the palm of her hand and we can also hold her in the palm of our hand.
That's beautiful symbology. And what are they made out of? I've been looking at them and I mean, I don't have one,
Mhm.
but what is the material they're made of? I'm just curious.
They're made. So I do the original sculpture in clay, and then
Oh.
the later ones are done in clear casting resin with mica pigmentation. Usually, though, sometimes I use alcohol ink in them as
Mm,
well. It really depends on what the style is, and half of what they communicate really comes through the color.
yeah.
And so the colors are created in lots of ways. So many of them have mica pigmentations in them to color them. But yeah, they're clear casting resin.
Beautiful. And people can put them on their altars or
Mhm.
uh
Or carry them in their pockets or tucked into
yeah.
their shirts. And that's something that I've said before too, is like the energy, there's energy that like raises goddess temples across the country or builds empires, but there's also the energy that like has to carry a baby across continents, and you need something small that you can hold in your hand instead of building columns and pyramids and towers.
Right.
You need something small that you can hold in your hand while you're cooking dinner or toting that baby, or helping somebody with a task or tending to the sick. You need something small that you can hold in your
Yeah.
hand.
And even some of your books are pretty small. I'm looking at
Yes.
the
Mhm,
Goddess
mhm,
Devotional and I put it in my backpack the other day. It's
mhm,
perfect.
mhm.
Perfect
Yes,
size.
I love creating the pocket-sized devotionals because they can travel with you everywhere. And I've had people tell me that they carry them in their scrubs pocket. They work in a hospital, and the book is small enough to put in their pocket of their scrubs, so they can have it with them at the hospital, and that makes me happy. My 365 Days of Goddess book
Yeah.
is very fat and weighs almost 3 pounds because it's a lot. 365 readings is a lot to
Yeah.
put into one book. And so it's a big brick of a book, but several of my other ones are small and pocket size. And I personally really love them. They accompany me everywhere I go too. And I enjoy that pocket sized experience.
Yeah.
Little
It's
touchstone with the
it's very
sacred.
intimate and makes
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
like, we're an on the go society. We're constantly moving
mm-hmm.
around, and if we're not moving houses, we're moving between jobs or transitional
Yeah.
lifestyles, cycles, seasons. We're always on the go, on the move. So it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I love these devotional books. And
Yeah.
well, can you tell us a little bit about your newest book, The Great Between?
Yes. So The Great Between is my first book that is specifically written as a devotional honoring one goddess. My other devotionals are really intended to speak to your practice, so they speak to a broad sense of the sacred or broad sense of divinity, the holy in the everyday. And so The Great Between is a little bit of a departure from that. I mean, my Walking with Persephone book is a lot about Persephone, but The Great Between is really my first book that's in honor of or in devotion to a really specific goddess, which is Inanna. And I wrote that book based on a small group circle that I led with some friends last year. We had an Inanna circle together using the Inanna anthology by Girl God Books. And as we worked through that anthology together as a small group, I started to write devotional poems to Inanna. So Inanna is a goddess who's been part of my life in some way for a lot of years. I write about that at the beginning of The Great Between, of like how I met her and how she came into my life. So she's been a part of my life for a long time, but I started to write this series of prayers for her during this study group or during this small circle. And it evolved into a small devotional companion book. And I originally actually was just going to make it be a handout for my patrons on Patreon. And
Mm.
as I started to put it together into the handout, I thought, wait a second, this is a little book. Like, this is a real book in and of itself. It's not just a handout. And so it became another one in my series of goddess devotionals. And I hope to do some others like that are focused on specific goddesses. So anyway, essentially, I consider it to be a compilation of prayers for times in the great between. So in Inanna's classic story, it starts out with Inanna putting her ear, or from the great above, Inanna puts her ear to the great below. So she's in the great above, she puts her ear to the great below. And these poems came from what happens in the great between. What happens in the great between? And so they are prayers to offer and from places of the great between.
Mm, okay. Anana descends into the underworld.
Yes.
Anana loses everything, all,
Mhm.
all her outer outer, jewels and status, and she goes deep down into the underworld, and then she arises,
Mhm.
reborn. So being in the great between, we're neither above or below, we're sort of in between.
Yes. Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, like in the liminal, in those liminal spaces,
Liminal
as we
space.
prepare to descend or as we prepare to rise, as we prepare to descend or as we prepare to rise, and kind of that cycle really between the rising and the descending.
Yeah. I get that. I love it
Hmm.
because we're
Hmm.
constantly in some kind of cycle of going above or
Yes.
below or somewhere in
Mhm.
between. Cool. And is it a small kind of pocketbook
It's a
devotional?
small little pocket size. Yes. Hmm.
Love
Hmm.
that. So what are some of your upcoming plans for the future? Do you have any retreats or workshops or big events coming up?
Um, so one of the things that take or involves the most of my energy is my Goddess Magic community that I offer on Patreon. And so, upcoming there in the Goddess Magic community, we work on. I have these seasonal guidebooks that I provide for people, and we have monthly themes. But upcoming, we have a series on cave time for the winter, like descending into the cave.
Oh.
Currently doing one on stepping into the flow because that's our theme for September. So we're stepping into the flow this month, and then next month, our theme is magic. So I'm doing a series on claiming your magic. And then in November and December, I'm doing a series on cave time and descending into the cave, and in the winter part of the year, as well as another series on winter magic. So I do a whole bunch of work with that community. We do live community practices, we do monthly live circles, and then I have these monthly series, kind of topical series as well. So upcoming, like I said, we've got the Claiming Your Magic cave time and then also winter magic before we cross the threshold into the new year.
And is that open to everybody?
Yes.
Anywhere? Okay.
It's
Great.
at patreon.com/goddess magic. And I have multiple tiers of membership. So I currently have a $3 tier open, but that one's closing this month. And so the core tier really is a $10 a month Goddess Magic community level tier. But there's all kinds of levels, including even a free level, so people can participate. Yeah, there and there's the reward, the benefits and the access varies based on tier, but you always get something, whether you're free or all the way up to the top tier. There's always something for you at least once a week.
That's great to provide a range for, the different types of
Yes.
people and what
Mhm.
we can all afford and
Absolutely.
have time for. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Lastly, do you have a website or a blog, or what's the best way for people to get in touch with you or find out more about you?
Yes. So I love to invite people to join me at 30daysofgoddess.com. That is a daily devotional practice that I began in 2021 and has been ongoing every single day since then. And the core practice is always free. There is, so this month we have a Danu goddess ritual packet that's available there. The thematic video is always free. There's printable prayer books, printable prayer cards, little ritual ideas, practices, etc. So the core practice at 30 Days of Goddess is always free. Welcome anyone to join me. There's a newsletter mailing list, there's a live circle, and the video and the printables are all right there on the webpage. And it starts with the current month. And as you scroll down, you'll see the resources from the past month. It's a very simple website, so it's a good one to get going with. So 30daysofgoddess.com for daily practice resources and engagement. And then if you want to go deeper, the Goddess Magic community on Patreon is patreon.com/Goddess Magic. And as I said, we have live community practices and guidebooks and printables and daily inspiration, and all kinds of good stuff there. And then, of course, you can also go to bridgesgrove.com, which has, kind of is a hub that points you all the other places where I am.
Wonderful. So I highly encourage everybody to go to one of those websites or all of them and find out more about Molly and what she does and her books. It has been such a pleasure. Thank you for all your amazing creativity and energy and inspiring us to connect with the goddess and honoring the sacred in our everyday lives, wherever we are. All your books and goddess statues that help us to create magic. So blessed be and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've really appreciated our conversation.
Yeah. And thanks to all our listeners. I really appreciate you. This podcast is really starting to level up, and we are honoring the goddess in all walks of life. So thank you. Thank you, everybody, to all the listeners. And have a great rest of your evening or day, Molly.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Blessed be. Bye bye.
Blessed be. Bye bye.